Κυρίες και κύριοι, καλησπέρα σας. Καλώς ήρθατε στο Καναδικό Ινστιτούτο. My name is Jacques Perron, the director of the Institute, and it's a great pleasure for all of us here at the Canadian Institute. Zoe Dilibasis, Jonathan Tomlinson, our scholar this year, our fellow this year. Where is Justine Lefebvre? To have you all with us for this first lecture, the first event of our 2023-2024 season. And so it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you Iason-Nikolaos Rodopoulos, who is doing his Ph.D. at the Department of History at York University. He did his master's of political science at McMaster. Now he's doing his PhD in history. He did his master's in the Department of Political Sciences at McMaster University, and his bachelor degree at the University of Toronto. His dissertation, is focused on his lecture this evening, that is on the reconstruction of Greek industry after World War II and the domestic civil war, as well as the involvement of the United States through the Marshall Plan. They always get very involved in things, eh? These American friends of ours. He's also a member of the History Committee of the Hellenic Heritage Foundation, the HHF, from which he received an annual fellowship. And he's also receiving for 2023-2024 an Ontario Graduate Scholarship. And all this helps him pass a few months with us here in Greece in the autumn. Now he's going back, he told me, to Canada in a few weeks, but then we'll be back again in the winter. And so we are happy that he has accepted to speak to us this evening about the Marshall Plan and the reconstruction of the Greek industry. So, Iason, thank you.
Good evening to everyone. It is a great pleasure, a great honor to be here with you today. It is a privilege. I don't need to introduce myself because the dear director already did for me. I will tell you that my speech is going to be about 40 minutes long, or at least this is how much time Mr. Tomlinson, the assistant director of the Institute, gave me. I will try to be briefer than that. I know you might have more nice things to do than hearing about the Marshall Plan tonight, but I still hope that what I will say today, that you will find it interesting. So thank you very much for being here, and we will start immediately. Before we talk about the Marshall Plan and about the Greek industry specifically, we need to make a historical retrospective. Greece was occupied during World War II by Nazi German forces, fascist Italian and Bulgarian forces for 3 years between 1941 and 1944. During that time, of course, there were mass executions and brutalities by the invaders, as in all European countries that were occupied by the fascists. Famine kills hundreds of thousands of people, especially in the urban centers, Athena and Thessaloniki. There was a strong resistance by the majority of the Greek people and the formation of armed guerrilla groups. The most popular one was the National Liberation Front, EAM, which was directly was controlled by the Communist Party of Greece, which by the end of the occupation had occupied most of Greece's territory, except Epirus, which was occupied by the right-wing National Republic Greek League, also known as ETVA. Since before the end of the occupation, there was a conflict between the two guerrilla groups and the government in exile that was outside Greece, of who is going to be in charge of the country when the occupation ends. For this reason, civil conflicts between the two armed groups begin as early as of 1943, before the occupation ends. And in October 44, this is when occupation ends, the centrist government of George Papandreou arrives in Athens, takes over, but at the same time, the National Liberation Front is still in control of most of the country. The government of Papandreou asked the guerrilla group to give up their weapons. They refused, and they organized a mass protest in December 1944 at the center of Athens. The protesters were met by bullets from the soldiers of the Greek army and of the British army. This is the event that started the period called as the Kemvriana, which consisted of battles between the guerrilla groups, the British army, and the governmental army. A few months later, in January 1945, there was an agreement between EAM and the official government, the Vargas Agreement, which it was hoped that it would end the conflict. It did not, eventually, because it was violated from both sides, mostly the side of the government. And as a result, in 1946, the Communist Party decided to abstain from the national election. A right-wing government came into power, and this government organized a referendum which was allegedly fraudulent to return King George II back to the throne of Greece. Under these circumstances, the civil war officially began in 1946 between the National Liberation Front, which had now transformed to an army, was called the Democratic Army, and the official state National Army of Greece. The civil war lasted for 3 years, until 1949. It was considered one of the first major military event of the Cold War. For this reason, and because of the geostrategic position of the country, both Greece, because of the civil war, and Turkey, because of its geographical position become the politico-military focus of the Truman Doctrine. For those who don't know what it was, the Truman Doctrine was the decision by President Truman of the United States to not let Greece, mostly, and Turkey fall into the hands of communists, again, because of their position. As a result, they got involved in the civil war, and this led the National Army of Greece to victory. The civil war created deep social division. Citizens that were affiliated with the Communist Party or the left in any way were persecuted in many ways. This is a picture of the island of Makronissos, one of the islands where concentration camps were built to imprison people that were associated with the left. It was a place where people were sent there, imprisoned, they were tortured. Many of them stayed for many years, even after the end of the Civil War. The last political prisoners of Makronissos returned to their homes, actually, in the early 1960s. With only a few exceptions, 2 years in the early 1950s and between 63 and 65, Greece is governed by right-wing governments between 1936 and 1981. However, in these conditions, the legal representative of the Communist Party, the Unified Democratic Left, became official opposition in 1958. And in the municipal election of the same year, they won the biggest cities of Greece. As a result, in the election that followed in 1961, there was a fraud, because the palace, the army, and the government were feared that there might be a left-wing takeover. So there was a fraud in the election favoring the right against the center and the left. The crisis continued. In 1963, in Thessaloniki, a member of the parliament for the United Democratic Left, Grigoris Lambrakis, was assassinated. In 1965, which was a time that right after the assassination of Lambrakis, there was a government takeover. The Union of Center came into power. It was one of the few, as I said, liberal breaks in right-wing governments. But in 1965, the government fell because of an internal conflict that became known as Iuliana. In July 1965, some ministers of the government disagreed and they decided to ask the king to form their own government, and the king gave them that permission. And of course, from 1967 to 1974, after all this political crisis, there was a military dictatorship that was tyrannically ruling Greece for 7 years. Let's go to the more economic information. Because of the Civil War and of World War II, of course, there was huge loss in human capital and infrastructure. About 70% of the Greek fleet, the Greek boats, was lost. There were no cars left, there were no trains left. The railway network and transportation network were totally destroyed. Bridges were also destroyed. And if we consider that most European countries that were bombed during World War II had to reconstruct their economy from level 0, Greece, because it also experienced a civil war, had to reconstruct its economy for level -10. So the situation was even more difficult. The United Nations decided to intervene, and the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, called the UNRWA, together with the British government, were the first that offered some economic assistance to the Greek population, mostly with a goal to make sure that the remaining population survived, so they provided mostly food and clothes, and they tried to make a plan for the reconstruction of the economy. But by 1947, and at that time the Civil War had already started, the British decided that they don't want to intervene anymore, so the Americans take over. The Marshall Plan was an economic assistance that was offered by the United States to the countries of Western Europe to reconstruct their economies and to ensure that they don't fall under communist Soviet leadership. About $1 billion US dollars arrived in Greece, and about $15 billion US dollars arrived to Western Europe in total. Under these conditions, Greece is consolidated in the Western sphere of influence, and by 1953, which is the time that the direct assistance from the Americans to Greece ends, there is a very important policy that takes over by the Minister of Coordination, Spyros Markezinis. He decides to devaluate the drachma and connect it to the American dollar. That meant that the drachma, until that time, was worth 50 US American dollars. Since 1953, and for 20 years in a row, it was straight worth 30 US American dollars. This proved to be crucial because it helped Greece grow its economy, grow its production, increase their exports, and at the same time, of course, it ensured a currency stability, which was crucial. Let's go to the industry, which is why we're here today. When I was looking at what I'm going to do my PhD on. And I started being interested about the industry, and I started visiting archives to see what I can find. I immediately realized that I first had to understand what was the mechanism of financing, not only of the industry, but of the Greek economy in total. As we can all understand, of course, everything began from the United States. From 1948 to 1951, the US government, Economic Cooperation Administration, ECA, was sending the money to Greece and to the Western European economies. The same agency was later replaced by the Mutual Security Agency, which focused more on military assistance to the Western European countries. The early 1950s is a time that economic reconstruction has already started to take place in Europe, and it is also the time that the war in Korea begins. So the attention of the Americans is now focused on the military events rather than economic reconstruction. In Greece, the funds that arrive are initially controlled by a committee called American Mission for Aid to Greece, also known as AMAG, which consisted of American agents that arrived in Greece and established in every ministry, every agency, every service that you can imagine, and was offering their advice and their proposals for how the funds should be distributed. Later, in 1948, this was replaced by the Central Committee of Loans, KEV, which lasted until 1954, until the end of the direct assistance that the Americans provided to Greece. The Central Committee of Loans was replaced by the Organization of Financing Economic Growth, an entity that lasted until 1964. This is how it worked. Every company of the industry, every hotel in the tourist sector, every shop, every kind of company in every sector of the economy was applying to one of these agencies, and for a loan, and these agencies were approving or rejecting the applications. In other words, these agencies were telling the banks of Greece whether they should give the companies the loan or not. And this situation lasted up to until the middle 1970s. So for about 25 years, the state was approving or disapproving which company should get what loan. The Organization of Financing Economic Growth, the Organization of Industrial Growth, and the Organization of Tourist Trust, which was focused more on the industry of tourism, were merged in 1964, and they formed the Hellenic Bank of Industrial Growth, ETVA, which was an entity that lasted until 2003, before it was absorbed by the Bank of Piraeus. The economic miracle. It is obvious that after all this assistance, the economy indeed starts to be reconstructed. And as you can see in these numbers here, Greece achieves a very impressive rate of growth. Initially the 1950s, and then in the 1960s it becomes even better. As every historian knows, before they start doing a PhD, they need to look at what is the relevant historiography. So the first thing I did was to look at the international historiography of the Marshall Plan. These scholars, Tony Chad, Barry Eichengreen, Michael Hogan, Max Schulze, they offer some very important information, some very they offer in their books some information of how the Marshall Plans were distributed in Europe and how the plan contributed to the reconstruction of the Western European economies, mostly from a pan-European level. There are a few works that focus on how the Marshall Plan helped each country separately to reconstruct its economy. And mostly these studies are focusing either on Germany or France or Italy, such as Paul Ginsburg. I chose to study this book because it is the only book I've came across so far that discusses the role that the industry played in the reconstruction of the Italian economy. In the Grecophone historiography, there is a big variety of works that focus on how the Marshall Plan helped Greece reconstruct its economy. Most of it is Grecophone. William Hardy McNeill is an exception. But very few works focus on the role of the industry. I have found 3 sources so far, and the 2 were not written by historians. The first was written by an engineer, Lefteris Anastasakis, the third by an economist, Antonis Kefalas, and only the book about the history of the aluminum of Greece, the French company Pessinet, was written by Kostas Kostis, which is a historian. So I realized that there is a gap in the relevant historiography that needs to be filled. How will be filled? With my central dissertation question, which is, what were the criteria by which the Greek state approved or rejected financing towards major and minor companies of the industry between 1944, which is when the Nazi occupation ends, and 1974, which is the time that the dictatorship falls. It is important to note that despite that the funds of the Americans stopped sending funds directly to Greece in 1954, American money remains in the Greek economy, in the Greek banks, for the next decades as well. So up to and including the dictatorship, the companies still have to ask for approval from the state committees whether they should get a loan or not. Greece has a multi-dimensional uniqueness in comparison to the economic miracle of other European countries. It is a country that experienced civil war right after World War II. It is a country with a democratic way of government, but an illiberal government that divides citizens between first and second class. It is a political system that is heavily depending on the power of the king and of the army. It is a peculiar economic model with a private sector that cannot operate without a state, but also a state sector that cannot operate and is heavily depending on private interests. And it is also a country that immediately after the Civil War, the government encourages the people to leave. And this is how we ended up having hundreds of thousands, if not millions of immigrants to the United States, to Canada, to Germany, to Western Europe, to Australia. This is something many people don't know, that the state actually encouraged immigration. Since the time I started doing my research, I have worked mainly with these archives. Those are the Cultural Foundation of the Bank of Piraeus, PIOP, archives, the General State Archives, the archives of the Public Power Corporation, and I recently started working with the National Bank of Greece archives and the Bank of Greece. My hitherto findings reveal that the industry was financed in 3 main ways. The first was in the first years after World War II and the Civil War, through German and Italian reparations. There was a committee, a state committee called Organization of Management of Allied Material, called ODC, which was responsible for demanding reparation from both Italy and Germany. And I found out that some companies applied to this organization, and they did receive reparations from Italy and Germany in the form of machinery. But this was for the first years after the Civil War. The fund from the Marshall Plan was, of course, the main wage, and is also the central theme of my dissertation. But some companies were not assisted or were not assisted that much in comparison to other companies from the Marshall Plan. So they had to make direct agreements with foreign banks, mostly the United Kingdom, such as the Export-Import Bank, the United States, such as the Export-Import Bank, and the banks in the United Kingdom. I'd like to say a few words, start with the ODC. When I was doing my work at the General State Archives, I asked for if they have information about two major companies, Piraeus, Petraki, and Titan, which I will talk about in a few minutes. They showed me, instead of these two companies, they showed me the collection of Ευθύμιος Malagardis. I had no idea at the start what this had to do with what I asked. But it turned out that in this collection, the history of modern Greece is hiding. Malagardis was an engineer and a member of the Technical Chamber of Greece. Why is he important? Because in 1948, he had a very important role in the Greek government's efforts to request war reparations from Germany and Italy through ODC. He went to Germany, he saw all the machinery that the Greek state was demanding, and he arranged for this machinery to be sent to Greece. Later, he was hired by the American company Embasco, which was the company that overtook the project of creating the Public Power Corporation. And when he was hired, he overlooked some major electrification projects. He was the person that essentially was directing the construction of the DEI factories, of all the well-known DEI factories, essentially, in Megalopoli, in Ptolemaida, in Aigorgis, in Aliveri, everywhere. Actually, the history of the Public Power Corporation beyond 1956 generally remains unexplored, so I found this collection particularly interesting, and there will definitely be a chapter about in my dissertation. What I would like to share with you is my difficulty to find more information about ODC, because there was material in the General State Archives. The problem with the archives sometimes in Greece is that they are obligated by laws to not show some material without to the researchers, without someone from the archives overseeing the research. So the material about ODC was not in the building of the General State Archives. It was in another building, and I did not have access to it. I went to the Bank of Piraeus archives. I asked about ODC. They showed me some companies, mostly small ones, that received machinery from ODC, and some of them, many of them actually, declared bankruptcy a few years after they received reparation, which is strange. Actually, a few days ago, when I was doing some final research for this presentation, I went to the National Bank of Greece archives, and I was looking up in the database of what I can find, and this is where I finally found some folders about ODC, and I will actually go there tomorrow to see what they have. The Odyssey sounds like Odyssey, doesn't it? So far, I have studied the case of two emblematic Greek companies. The first is Titan Cement. It was founded in 1902 in Elefsina by the Kanellopoulos and Hadjikyriakos families. The Hadjikyriakos family later founded the rivals of Titan called Ayet Iraklis. Before World War II, the company was heavily depending on Germany because it was importing machinery like ovens through agreements with a German company group, which is quite notorious for their role that they had in the Holocaust. They also imported foreign expertise, with German engineers moving to Greece with their families. Of course, the Nazi occupation interrupted the progress of the Greek cement industry, and the leadership of Titan provided for the survival of its labor, as most companies of the time did. When the World War II ended, Greece Reconstruction increased the demand for cement. As we said earlier, the infrastructure was destroyed, so there was need for building new houses, new apartment buildings, new factories, new infrastructure. So the access to loans of the Marshall Plan was the only way. In 1948, Titan received 2.2 billion old drachmas, and when I say old, I mean pre-war, drachmas through the Marshall Plan. 4 more loans followed. And the criterion by which it was approved, it was actually a report by the British advisor submitted to the Vice Minister of Coordination, Konstantinos Doxiadis, in which they confirmed that the company constantly had its books balanced and publicly provided reports of final product costs, which was very innovative for the time. Of course, one of the targets was to reduce the dependence on the import of expertise from Germany. And this was a success story because the post-war Greek cement industry indeed incorporated and improved the imported expertise. 10 years later, in 1958, Titan received a new loan of 51 million drachmas from OHOA, which had replaced the Central Committee of Loans. And 10 years after that, the company received a new loan of another 50 million drachmas in 1968, during the dictatorship. What difference did that make to the company? There are some interesting findings that I would like to share. In 1954, the company started producing the Lafarge cement for the first time in Greece. It participated in important construction projects organized by the NATO, such as the Seyhan Dam in Adana, which is interesting because we see a cooperation of the Turkish government with the Greek private sector within the concept of collaboration in the Marshall Plan. In 1960, we have the first electric filter. And why is this interesting is because in 1963, a new loan of $630,000 American is provided to establish new filters for chimney in order to reduce the dust that was bothering local people. So this is actually one of the first findings that the people and the government and the institutions of Greece start to care about the environment in Greece. In 1977, it became, the Greek cement industry became the 3rd largest export power in the world and the 2nd in Europe. The second company is Piraeus Patraiki, which is defunct now. It does not exist. It was founded in 1919 in Patra by 4 families, including those of Kantsabas and Stratos. Similar to Titan, it imported mechanical equipment from Germany. Also similarly to Titan, during World War II, the company provided for the survival of its labor. When the war ended, the company was in huge debt, but this debt was deleted by laws because of the hyperinflation that the occupation had created. Technically, all debts that were accumulated by private companies were deleted, were forgiven. This person here is Christoforos Katsambas, the CEO of Piraeus Patraiki, and this is his book in which I found in the archives of the Bank of Piraeus, in which he argues that the textile industry was not assisted by the Marshall Plan. Indeed, and this is where we end at the 3rd way of financing the industry through direct agreements with banks, the company managed to get a loan of 400,000 British pounds in March 1953 by the Copaida company, which was then owned by the British government. And it is interesting that he actually reveals that in order to persuade the British to give the loan to the company, he promised them an 8% interest fee and an additional 10% to the price they had agreed 3 months ago for cotton supply. In other words, he bribed them. One of the reasons why the foreign banks were financing Piraeus Patraiki was because in the early 1950s it started publishing balance sheets and analytical reports for shareholders, which is important because the companies of the time were not obligated to do so by the Greek law. For this reason, in 1954, it received another loan from the Export-Import Bank upon approval from the State Department itself. And in 1962, the company published a bond loan of almost 50 million drachmas. The deadline to concentrate the sum was set for 8 days later, but it was covered in 3 hours due to the investors' trust in Piraeus Patraiki. They had no idea what would follow in the future. As I said earlier, the history of the creation of the Public Power Corporation and the formation of its monopoly in the provision of energy has not been discussed thoroughly. But I would like to say a few words because it has direct relationship to my dissertation. It was founded in 1950, and as I said earlier, it was financed by the American company Ebasco. And up to that time, 385 private and municipal electricity companies were operating, and they were providing electricity and energy to the local populations. In 1956, the process of nationalizing the existing companies began, with they finally acquiring a full monopoly by the end of the 1950s. As it is obvious, both companies, Piraeus Patraki and Titan, and all companies of the Greek industry, applied to they so that they can have their factories electrified. But there is some interesting stories here as well. In 1961, the Titan's application for electrification of its factory in FKRP in Thessaloniki is approved. 1 year later, there is an agreement achieved for supplying electric energy, and the agreement, interestingly, and this is something that I found in the archives of they, forbids the client, the company, to receive or provide electricity to third parties. And the reason they did that is because up to the time that they acquired the monopoly to provide electricity to the Greek population, some companies were sending electricity from their factories to the local villages that might be surrounding the factory. Something interesting that I found is the agreement, among others, mentioned the import of equipment, cars mostly, through agreements with they and foreign companies such as the River Limited. And Piraeus Patraki also received electrification from they. Initially, just like Titan, it attempted to auto-electrify its projects, but this was rejected by they. Full electrification of the company's factories was achieved in 1964 through the expropriation of local private lands in Patra. It would be interesting if maybe future researchers could find out what happened to the people that owned this land. Were they hired by they? Were they did they receive a reparation in any way? In 1965, it also received electrification for Elviet, which was located here in Califea and was the daughter company of Piraeus Patraki. And in 1966, they received electricity for the main factory in Megalopevko in Attiki. Of course, these two companies are just the beginning. I plan to explore all these companies that you see here and what happened with their financing from the Marshall Plan or not. As a start, these are the most emblematic, the most important Greek companies that I'm going to look at. I have already started looking at some of them, but they will not be the only one. As I said earlier, very few works have been written about the history of the companies of the industry. There is one exception about the aluminum of Greece, which was owned by the French company Pechiney, which I mentioned earlier, that was written by Kostas Kostis. But no one so far has researched what happened with smaller companies of the industrial sector. And my odyssey with Odyssey, I found this a good opportunity to start looking at what happened with companies in smaller level that are not so much well known, but in some cases are equally important to their contribution to the reconstruction of the Greek industry. In 1967, there was a military coup. And a group of right-wing colonels took over power of the country by force, and they stayed in power for 7 years. There were people that were directly related to the CIA and to the American government and to the American economic interests. But why we're discussing them today is because they were people that had no economic knowledge at all. So the economic policies that they adopted while they were in power proved to be catastrophic at the end of the regime. So let's see what happens. We said earlier that companies applying up to that time, the main criterion was how faithful they are to to their debts, to their loans that they got in the past, how trustworthy they are in other ways. But the junta decides to change that. And they start with a legal framework. The laws 89 of 1967 and 378 of 1968 is about the establishing of foreign companies of industry and trade in Greece. And among other terms, the applying company is obligated to declare whether it is willing to offer a guarantee on behalf of a Greek or a foreign bank. It is not obligated to offer a guarantee. They're just obligated to say they're willing to do so. There's complete tax exemption for 1 year. All kinds of duties or taxes that were existing at that time or that may be imposed in the future. So they want to make sure that future governments will also follow the same policy. Interestingly, there's also tax exemption for the activity of the entrepreneurs and the property owned outside Greece, not only of the owners of the companies, but of their employees as well. Additionally, in 1971, there was another law, Law 887, which states that about 50% of the annual loan interest covered of a company that receives loans must be covered by the state's budget through the Bank of Greece. And something that I found in the collection of the meetings of the Bank of Industrial Growth was that since 1968, companies are not anymore obligated to offer guarantees. We saw the legal framework for that when applying for a state loan, except putting a line on the removable property. So let's say that I own a company, I go to the Greek state during the junta, I apply for a loan. The only thing the state asks me is to put a line on the movable property. And by saying movable property, I mean the factory that I will create, which means that if I don't create the factory, I can just take the money and go. As it happened in many examples, the most notorious, the most well-known one is the case of Iason-Nikolaos, in which the company promised to create the factory of Coca-Cola in Greece and also create 5 agricultural units. They did create the factory of Coca-Cola. The 5 agricultural units were still waiting for them. This is now 1967, 1968. The Central Committee of Loans and the OHOA have been replaced by the Bank of Industrial Growth, the Hellenic Bank of Industrial Growth. And of course, the board of directors is replaced by new personnel that is favored by the junta. In the Bank of Piraeus archives, I found the collection of the up to that time director of ETVA, Nikos Porphyrogenis. Nikos Porphyrogenis was the brother of the gorilla Miltiadis Porphyrogenis. And despite that, he was obviously not a communist, but his name alone was enough for him to leave his place right after the military coup and flee to Switzerland. There were new directors, Grigoris Panas for 3 years, from 1967 to 1970. The notorious Paul Totomis from 1970 to 1972. Totomis was a Greek American. He was the right hand, we would say, of Tom Papas. And during the dictatorship, before he takes charge of ETVA, he was the Minister of Security. So the Minister of Security. So he was the person that was putting people in jail during the dictatorship. And after that, he was the person who was deciding which company will receive or will not receive a loan through the tyrannical regime. And for 2 more years, Alexandros Tsartos was the director. When I was studying the period of the junta, I looked into the minutes of the board of director meetings, and I also studied the annual reports. Before I show you my findings, I'd like you to notice how they look like. The first one the annual report of 1967 is a serious report with numbers, with information about the growth of the industry, with budget reports, with you name it. From 1968 to 1972, the annual reports start looking more like, I dare to say, gossip magazine. You know, some sexy colors, many pictures, look how great country we are, look how grown our economy is, look what we're doing here. There are some charts that are very populist, which show nothing, essentially. Interestingly, I was not able to find the annual report of 1973, and I was told by the Bank of Piraeus and by the National Bank that it may have not been published at all, which was strange because the bank was publishing annual reports every year. 1973 is a crucial year. It is a year of that the oil crisis began. In the early 1970s, the Bretton Woods has collapsed. 1973 is the year that Papadopoulos attempts to liberalize his regime, and this is the time that the events in Nomiki and Polytechnio take place. This year, there was no annual report, but the next year, 1974, when the OHOA finally fell, the budget is serious again, with numbers, with stats, with all the important information, including the fact that the state, that the Greek post-junta state, hired accountants to investigate the Industrial Bank of Growth, including all the companies that got loans from the Industrial Bank of Growth during the junta, and find out whether there was. I'm sorry, I'm tired. Whether there was there were excessive loans given, whether there was corruption, and there was a lot of corruption indeed. So, what do the annual reports say? This is the report of 1966. It doesn't include many information, just has the companies that the ETVA was participating either completely or as a majority or as a minority. In 1967, I'm sorry, this is in Greek, I will translate it for you. We have a comparison of the loans that were approved for the industry and for every sector of the economy in comparison to the previous year. So in 1966, about 200 million drachmas were approved, and we have double the approvals in 1 year later. These are the balance sheets, 1967 in comparison to 1966 and 1965. So these numbers that you see are in millions of drachmas and are the loans that were given to every sector of the economy collectively, in addition to the loans that were given in the previous year. So the blue column that you see is for 1967, and it is all the loans that were given to the industry, to tourism, to metallurgy, to shipping industry, since the creation of ETVA in 1964. So, in 65, the industry has received in total 2 billion drachmas. In 1967, 2.4 billion drachmas. As we will continue, the numbers will increase. In 1967, this is again a list of the companies that the ETVA owns, including the aluminum of Greece and Viohalco. I know that numbers sometimes tend to be tiring, so I went to 1972 directly because we have some interesting comparisons here. Again, these were the loans that were given, not just approved, but they were given to the industry. In 1969, the industry received $700 million. In 1972, 900 million drachmas. Did I say dollars? I meant drachmas, sorry. Okay, so these are the balance sheets in 1972. Let's begin with the blue section. The numbers that you see on the far right are the drachmas that the industry, the tourist, the shipping, and all sectors have received since 1964. So in 1972, the industry has received 5 billion drachmas. In the Greek sector, on the far left, the industry has received only 2.1 billion drachmas. So in just 7 years, the loans given to the industry have more than doubled. So have the companies where the Bank of Industrial Growth is participating. In the beginning, it was owning 100%, 9 companies. In 1972, it owns 14. It was owning, as a minority, only 13 companies. Now it owns 32. But in 1974, democracy is restored after the treason of the colonels in Cyprus. And of course, there is a new board of directors. Petros Steriotis, the president of the Economic University of Athens, is hired as the president of as the director of the Bank of Industrial Growth. And this is from the annual report 1974. Look how serious it is. No pictures, no nice colors, just numbers and information. And among the information that is mentioned is the fact that the bank goes through complete checks by accountants. Okay. During the last weeks, I was literally sleeping. Well, not sleeping, but I was spending most of my day at the Bank of Piraeus archive. I was leaving my house at 10 o'clock in the morning, and I was going back at 1 o'clock midnight. And the main work I did with, which by the way will be the topic of my next publication, was the minutes of the board of director meetings during the dictatorship. These boxes that you see here are the folders of the companies that received loans. This is in 1966 actually. You see 4 boxes, it's actually 2.5 because there is some 1965 and some 67 as well. The other picture are the loans that were received by the industry in 1970. We have 8 boxes there. I just found it interesting. I thought it was a clue by itself. Some of the findings that one can find out by studying the minutes, is of course that various employees were dismissed in the first years of the dictatorship between 1967 and 1969, charged with spreading communist propaganda. Essentially, they called it anti-nationalist and anti-Greek propaganda, which was a lie, of course. Other than the industry, I saw some frivolous financing of various hotels, including 5th category hotels. Of course, as we know already, loans to hundreds of large and small companies of the industry and shipping sectors with no financial guarantee from their behalf. The important case is the case of Titan Cement, which received the 50 million loan that I mentioned earlier, the Greek shipyards, Halivourgiki, Larko, as well as the aluminum of Greece, Viohalco, Piraiki, Patraiki, Matsagos, and Greek marbles that were partly owned by the ETVA as well. I even came across a case of a loan sent to a fireproof utensils company which was larger than the company had asked for. They asked for 2 million drachmas and they received 3.5 for no reason. It was just a gift. Of course, there was a constant intervention by the junta in favor of the financing companies or saving them from bankruptcy. One important case that I found interesting was some companies that were making pharmaceuticals for plants, and I came across a case, not in the Bank of Piraeus, in the General State Archives actually, in which the ETVA has stopped providing this company with loans because there have been complaints by the people in northern Greece that they have eaten tomatoes and cucumbers and peppers and they have got poisoned. And this company is meeting with Patakos. And they're trying to persuade the government that we have nothing to do with that we are doing what the law obliges us to do, etc., etc. And Patakos is like, okay, don't worry, I will save you, but tell me, how many people have you killed? Like, just out of curiosity. Something I did not expect to find was that the ETVA was financing documentaries and films of national content, which was essentially propaganda of the regime, which had nothing to do with industrial growth. And so this information will be included, as I mentioned earlier, in my upcoming publication. Those were the dictators celebrating during Easter, and essentially this was these people's mentality when financing the industry, partying. You will tell me, okay, what's wrong with the industry receiving money? The interest that the industry had to pay in 1966 to get a loan from the Greek state was 6%. Up to 1970, it was 8%. Like I said earlier, the archives in Greece are obliged by laws, so they cannot give access to all the material. So I had access up to the 1970 in the minutes of the ETVA. But by looking at the Xenophon's Lotus collection at the Bank of Greece, I saw that the interest was 8.5%. After the dictatorship falls, the currency committee and the Bank of Greece, which is then taken by Xenophon's Lotus, decides to drop the interest to 2%, and ETVA protests. And they protest because, if you remember, there is this law from 1971 that the state has to pay half of the interest fee. So by taking into account that the companies of the industry during the junta, the number of the companies that received loans doubled or tripled, and some of them are not returning their loans back, ETVA is worried that they will never receive their money back. So they protest. And they have a reason to do so, actually, because they go bankrupt right after the dictatorship. The information that you see here is from the annual reports in 1967 and 1974. In order for the bank, which was a state bank, to be able to give all these loans, they had to take other loans from the Bank of Greece and from foreign banks as well. So as more and more companies were receiving loans, the debt of the ETVA was increasing. So in 1967, the bank had a debt of about 1.4 billion drachmas. By 1974, it has a debt of 15 billion drachmas. And of course, this is reflected in the numbers of the Greek economy as well. Despite that there is growth in the first years of the dictatorship, that continues because of the growth that existed before the colonies take place. Inflation rate is relatively low, but here's what happens. In 1973, the Bretton Woods collapses. The dictators attempt to make a new agreement with the United States to reconnect the drachma to the US American dollar. So they expect that when the Americans decide to devaluate the dollar, the same thing will happen with drachma as well. But this is not the case. As a result, in 1973, inflation rate begins skyrocketing. There is stagnation in production. There is inflation. There's a term actually that combines both. It's called stagflation. And from the time that we have this high growth rate up to 1973, in 1974 we have minus 6% growth, and inflation rate of almost 27%. Actually, Michalis Psalidopoulos, in his book about the history of the Bank of Greece, estimates the inflation in 1974 to be more than 35%. If you're interested in hearing some more information about the junta and about the economic policies that the junta adopted, we actually did a podcast this year with the Hellenic Heritage Foundation. It's called Εδώ Πολυτεχνείων. Here's the link. I can share it with you, with anyone that would like to hear. Okay, now here's a small surprise. Some of the questions that I had when I started my research was Canada involved in any way? Because I come from a Canadian university. I thought it would be interesting if I could find a connection between the two. Actually, I found a book. It's called For Greece, a Tear, written by Florence MacDonald in the 1950s, which was about the Greek War Relief Fund, which was established in Canada to send money to the people in Greece that were suffering. And it was also used in the early 1950s for the very strong earthquakes that destroyed the islands of the Ionian Sea in Kefalonia, Zakynthos, and Lefkada. But also, when I was looking at some Marshall Plan pamphlets at the Bank of Piraeus archives, I came across to a reference to the so-called Canadian Hellenic Commercial and Economic Organization, which was founded in 1946, with the purpose of drawing the attention of Canadian capital and Canadian technical factors towards the development of Greece. There is actually an organization today called the Greek-Canadian Chamber of Commerce in Canada. I don't know if it could be the continuation of this organization. I haven't looked at it. But the point is that the question whether Canada or the Greek community in Canada was involved in the financing of Greece's industry specifically remains unanswered. And I tend to look into that direction as well. These are just some of the archival collections I have looked for so far. And right now I have done about 1/3 of my research, so you can imagine how many more folders I'm going to read. Some of my secondary sources. Before I conclude, I would like to mention that even though I'm deeply interested in Greece and the Greek history, because I am from Greece, I was born and raised here, I do not intend, however, to treat Greece as a case of national exceptionalism. Instead, I plan to look into the mechanism of financing the industry. What happened with the Marshall Plan? Why some companies received money, some others did not? In the end, why this country started with so hopeful prospects in the 1950s, created an important industry in the 1960s, 1970s, and in the 1980s it ended up having no industry. So it went through a period of deindustrialization. What went wrong? What kind of economic model, what kind of vision did the US planners and the Greek government officials hope to achieve? So I plan to incorporate this research into the overall context of the Cold War history and of the overall reconstruction process of Western Europe, but also of countries that could be maybe compared, or regions that could be compared to the Greek case. In Europe, I think the most close example to Greece is that of southern Italy, not all of Italy, southern Italy. I have some academics have advised me to look into Spain and Portugal, but there cannot be there's not very good examples to compare because Spain has a very strong state that is in control of all aspects of the economy because it has a dictatorship for 30 years. So there is a very strong state that intends to control everything from above in the Francoist model. Portugal also has a dictatorship. It is a similar economy to Greece because it has an agriculture similar to Greece. It has shipping. It has agriculture. It has a similar population to Greece, but at the time, up to the 1970s, it is also a colonial country, which is a major difference from Greece. So it could be considered an example of a not European, but not totally European, Mediterranean, but also European, Near East country. So this is one of the conclusions I'm looking forward to get to. Which other countries could the Greek case be compared to, if it can be compared to other countries? So at this time, I would like to thank all of you for your attention, for your patience. I would like to thank the Canadian Institute of Greece for having me here today. I would like to thank my supervisory committee, Professor Sakis Gekas at York University, Professor Deborah Neal, also at York University, and Professor Michalis Psalidopoulos at the University of Athens. The Hellenic Heritage Foundation, which is provided me with a fellowship that allows me to come to my favorite country and do research and stay here for most of the year. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Can we take questions now? Or?
I take the mic.
Okay.
Thank you. Jonathan, is this working? Is it? Should be. Hopefully it's working. No, it's not, eh? I'm going to work,
Okay, so
here. Thank you very much.
Παρακαλώ.
It's a fascinating topic. It is, and I'm an archaeologist. These things are far from me, but it's interesting to see from so many angles you can try to tackle this question, and it's very kind of you to have shown all this to us. No, really, I didn't expect. I mean, something which is so vast. And thank you very much. I was very happy to listen to you this evening. Do we have any questions? Let me.
It works?
Now it works.
Okay. All right. Congratulations for your work. There is another industry absent that can be the object of many PhDs, is the shipping industry that is based on the possession by Greek ship owners of 100 liberties ships in the beginning and afterwards more, which is very important for our also economic and social history. Also, I find very interesting that you reject many myths that dictatorship was a good economic period for Greece, which is not true, as you showed. It was mostly the rhythm of the years before.
I don't think there's anyone with some serious academic knowledge that takes this statement seriously.
First of all, there is a popular myth, but even academics, they say. But there's another point. In the beginning of 50s, and of course, you know that the left had, before he was totally out of the system, they had also some ideas about the post-war economy. one of these was that Greece would be independent if it could create a really heavy industry. And there's a big debate even today, but in those days, a very polarized discussion, if all these programs, they gave the opportunity to create a really heavy industry or not. And they take as an example the very late creation by Haliburgiki of a real blast furnace that was late at least 10 years. So we did not have the opportunity to create a strong metallurgy in Greece for years. That could be the base for other kind of heavy industry. And of course, machinery is another sector that was not, Isola, for example, is a very low importance machinery, of course. We never created in Greece heavy machinery. But especially about steel industry was very important that they did not give the opportunity to create heavy industry.
Thank you very much for your comment. I'm a historian, or if you prefer, I'm a political science that is trying to become a historian. So I cannot really offer my opinion to the events that I am presenting. I'm just stating the events. I can, however, comment on the proposals by the left. What you say was concentrated in the work by Dimitris Batsis. Batsis was, for those who don't know, was one of the people, of the members of the Communist Party that were executed with Nikos Belogiannis in 1952. A very serious economist who argued that Greece should have a centralized model, essentially in the model of the Soviet Union. What he was definitely right about was that Greece should create an industry of means of production. Even when the economic miracle took place, Greece never created means of production. It was imported them from other countries, and including countries of the Eastern Bloc, even during the dictatorship. The dictatorship had a very good relationship with East Germany and Yugoslavia. Actually, when they was creating its factories in the 1960s, one of the factories that were created, that in Agiorgis in St. George, was created after an agreement made between the Greek company and a Soviet engineering company. The problem, however, with Batsis and the left analysis was that the model it proposed was taking into account that Greece already had some production that must be nationalized. And in the early 1950s, Greece had no production, which was the main problem.
Do we have other questions for a speaker?
Don't be too strict, Professor.
I'll do my best. Well, I mean, it's always a pleasure to have young students working on things that are related to Greek economic history. So to correct you, you're not just a political scientist trying to become a historian, you're also trying to become an economic historian. So I'm going to push you a little bit on the economics and the methodology here. So I would have a few minor points, but I think the major ones would be these. One, could you tell us a little bit about your methodology, how you think you envision this methodologically? Because you posed a question, you said, what are the criteria? And there you're going through the archives and you're looking at all these cases. And you collect interesting anecdotes, but how are you testing for the effect? Like, what is your control group? What is your counterfactual? How do you determine that, these are the criteria, because there are stories, and you can read them in many different ways. I'll give you a very simple example from just one of the last slides you gave. You make this implicit argument, which I think goes beyond just presenting the facts, that, the junta just gave money right and left and it was all corrupt. And then immediately you have this slide about the return of democracy. And the first thing the democratic regime does is apparently lower the interest rate dramatically. Now, how does that make any sense? If those were such bad loans, why is the democratic government then essentially reducing the interest rates on those? So these are important economic questions there. I mean, in this case, the answer to some extent is that. And I think anyway, I'll come back to the junta. So the first question is the methodological one. So how do you determine this? I'm interested also, you said, and this is part 1B, say, you said American money is still in the process. And I think that's an interesting question to pursue. We don't know anything about that. We understand that once 1954 comes, the Americans essentially close up shop. I mean, there continues to be a trickle of aid, but nothing compared to what is before. And so you have a lot of loans that are given by OHOA and OVA and all these things, and they are approved by these committees, but to what extent is that American money? We have no idea. One possibility is that to some extent it's repayment of pre-existing funds, but nobody has looked into this. So that would be interesting. On the junta, I'm surprised at the number of times I have to say that I don't think we need to prove that a dictatorial regime did bad policy economics to disagree with its existence. There's this implicit theory that if you don't like the junta, then you have to prove that everything it did is terrible. And that necessarily includes the economy. I think that is a functionalist argument. We can disagree and think that the junta is terrible regardless of its economic policy. And I think you're doing it a little injustice by suggesting that it was terrible. To give you a simple example, I'm not saying it was great, it made mistakes, but all the numbers you showed us, they are absolute numbers. What are the relative numbers? Like how much is this related to credits to the economy as a whole? We'll know there were a lot of them. They also seem to be outstanding loan balances. Outstanding loan balances inevitably increase if you have an expanding economy. You cannot have those rates of growth and not have expanding loan balances. So I would be a little bit more cautious in making statements, and I don't think that would necessarily make me, implying that the junta is a good thing. Let's once and for all distinguish between liking a political regime as a political regime and agreeing with and feeling the need to describe all of its policies as terrible. I think the junta, to a large extent, essentially continued the pre-existing policy framework. It just accelerated credit lending, and we know that.
Professor, you asked three three excellent, very sophisticated questions, and I will try to answer all of them. Regarding the methodology, I start with the archives of the state committees, the BEKE, the OHOA, ETVA, and I look at which company received what loan. The big challenge is indeed to find out what difference did financing make to each company. And this is a big challenge because not many Greek companies offer access to their archives. So I am indeed trying to find out how did financing help that company, how did it help the other company. It is easier to find material in the archives of banks like the Bank of Piraeus, the National Bank of Greece, the Bank of Greece probably as well, of how it helped that company. For now, I have focused on big companies because the big companies are the ones that in those archives, in the banks, they have the most material. I tried to access the archive of Titan company, but they gave me no access. And the Piraiki Patriki archive, we're still looking for it. I'm really interested in studying what happened to the Greek companies, and some of them may be lost forever. Some of them we don't even know of their existence. So the way to find out this is only through the banks of the archives of the banks. There's no other way. Regarding the American capital after the Marshall Plan, this is also an excellent question because officially the Marshall Plan ends in 1953, 1954, but the American capital remains in the Greek banks and they are given to the companies for up to a decade and even more than that after the Marshall Plan ends. So when we do get to the dictatorship, indeed, the money that is given to the companies, they're not Marshall Plan funds anymore. But as you very correctly said, Professor, the company, the bank, the ETVA, demands some of the companies that received Marshall Plan funds to return them to the bank. In some cases, some very limited cases, and mostly small companies, ETVA rejects financing because these companies still owe Marshall Plan funds to the state. And this is where sometimes the junta intervenes and says, give them the loan, it's okay. And this is how we get to the junta question. The junta was a tyrannical regime. It was a dictatorship. Of course, we don't need to discuss whether it was good or bad. My finding from studying the archive of ETVA was that it was not only a regime that adopted frivolous economic policies, it was a regime that felt completely unstable by giving all this money to literally everyone that asks for money. My understanding is that it is a regime that is trying to keep in power. It is trying to win the favor of the Greek people. It is trying to win the favor of the Greek and the foreign capital. And it's trying to create good relationships not only with the entrepreneurs, but also with smaller companies, with what we say in Greece, mikromesei επιχειρηματίες. Because this is the majority of the Greek population. So I saw this also as a message that they sent to the Greek people. My research is still ongoing. I still have a lot of things to find out about. I started looking at the junta actually only a few weeks ago because I spoke on Monday at a conference at the University of Athens about the junta, so there was an opportunity to move my research to that period. And this is the most beautiful part of research, is that the researcher also learns constantly. And as I'm sure you know, when one question gets answered, or the researcher thinks it gets answered, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions emerge. It's like Lernea Hydra. So I will take your comments and into account, and I will look into this direction as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have another? This working. It used to be terrible. Do we have another question?
Doesn't work?
Greek technology.
Probably funded with American.
Better than Greek business.
Probably. Surely. Thank you once again very much. We can, mingle around and speak with our lecturer around a glass of wine and cheese bits and sandwich. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much, Mr. Rodopoulos, for this. It was very, very interesting. Thank you.